To parse the codes of secrecy, disclosure, greed, and power in the struggle for UAP transparency and deeper ontological understanding, this is Neon Galactic, a podcast produced by PBS affiliate Key TV in Northern California. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. At times, I liken it to raising a lantern in a darkened tomb and doing our very best to read the reality behind the strange glyphs and alien ideas carved there on the ancient walls. There seems to be meaning hidden behind every line and pictograph, every monster made of part beast and man, but the message that was intended by those artists years ago remains occluded by ignorance, myth, history, and politics. I'm speaking, of course, about reading this long-running struggle for truth, for more and better information about baseline reality. What is this universe we inhabit? What are the objects that have been witnessed and reported in the skies throughout recorded history? Why can't we ever seem to find out? What does the government know? What have they learned from exotic materials? How much money has been made on the lies, threats, violence, and pain that constitute this 80 years long cover up? Too much. Today, our guest, Daniel Elizondo, will help us examine this moment in the fight for transparency and chart the path ahead. New whistleblowers, more cryptic hints, the lying liars in uniform and in tailored suits, chaos in government, and the Mod Squad set of advocacy organizations vying both for disclosure and perhaps their own place in history. They try and they struggle. Like every human endeavor since the beginning of time, it's all a mixture of failure and success, cowardice and courage, ego and transcendence. Where will this all end us up? Will we ever be better off? And is there any version of this strange story that has a happy ending? What would that even look like? Daniel Elizondo, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate that. I feel like I don't even need to be here because that's so eloquent and beautiful. I just want to stop the podcast there so we can just listen to that on a loop. Great job with that.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I put a lot of thought into the intros because I try to frame what the conversations are about and then also capture a little bit of the import of the moment. You know, that's what drives me, and I think a lot of my audience is recognizing that we're at this historical moment, that so much is at stake, and yet we seem to be spinning our wheels in a lot of ways, and that gets super frustrating when the stakes are so high. I invited you on the show because I think that you're one of the smartest people in the field. We've had conversations before, and you're deeply knowledgeable about all of these topics. And we seem to be at a peculiar moment in this struggle. It's interesting. There's a I don't know. People have to balance what their motives are in this whole discussion. I mean, are we after a confirmation that we're not alone as a species and that maybe this universe is more complicated and populated with things than we realize? Or, are we after sort of that enchantment that we lost with the scientific revolution, where we kind of put away all the old spiritual ideas, and now maybe some of those are once again revealing their heads and making us scratch our own heads to try and figure out what's real and at root here. Are we after the tech and the UFOs, or are we after opening up the universe for a broader kind of conception of what may be? In the end, it all comes down to the same set of questions, though. Like, what are UFOs? What does it represent? What are we being what's being withheld from us by people in power? And those are the questions that we're always wrestling with. And one of the things that's happened recently is that it seems like after what was years of progress, we've kind of ground to a halt in some respects. We've had some whistleblowers come out recently who've said some really fascinating things, but nothing that adds any real clarity. So just to start off, I'd like to get your take on where you think we're at in this moment. I mean, obviously, the country politically is on fire. There's, different things happening in every sphere, and a lot of them seem catastrophic. And then there's this UFO subject, which still kind of, goes on, but it seems to be taking less and less of people's attention because so much else is at stake. What are your thoughts on where we're at, and how do you think that we might, actually achieve some progress, or is that even possible at this point?
That's a big question, James. But
Yeah.
I think that it's an important one to sort of reflect about where we're at this present moment, especially with what's going on right now and what happened yesterday in Iran and in Israel. Obviously political tensions are high. We knew that was going to, happen at some point. I've seen a lot of people are pointing to Chris Bledsoe, right, as well. He predicted this, and
Absolutely.
sure, but at the same time, it doesn't take too much insight to predict that there would eventually be conflict between Iran and Israel, the United States, and so on and so forth. It was more of a matter of when rather than if.
Yeah.
That being said, I do think that um, that sort of focus explicitly and solely on the UFO topic can be quite limiting to our, in our worldview and in our research and in our progress. Because when we start to delude ourselves to think that everything is about UFOs,
Yeah.
that every policy decision, that every world development, when it all becomes about, how does this affect the subject matter? Or how does this affect what's happening in Congress with the subject? You're really limiting yourself to getting these broader perspectives and this larger context that helps you to make sense of what's been going on with the UFO topic, not just in the last few years, but throughout the decades. This frustration that we have about spinning our wheels is the same frustration that they had back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. It was always existential. We like to talk about the Cold War as if it's something that ended, but
Yeah.
the Cold War lives on, and so do the mindsets that sort of fuel the secrecy today, that fuel all of those policy decisions that we'd like to see changed. Uh, I feel like at the moment we have a lot of information, but like as you alluded to, a lot of this information that's coming out, it doesn't necessarily lead to a greater understanding or a broader grasp of the picture. On social media, online, and just in general with the subject, I see a lot of people who already know everything. They already know what the UFO is. They already know what it represents. They have all of the UFO related bullet points. Even if it's not in a nice, neat list, they've got all this information, and that list just grows and grows and grows. But what I find is there's not an associative understanding of all of that information that leads you to be able to answer the questions of why, right? Why now? Why are whistleblowers coming forward now? Why are they giving this information and not other information? Where's the evidence? What are the Cold War mindsets that are fueling this? What's behind all of it? And so I do think that a lot of times we spin our wheels because it becomes information overload. Lots of really intelligent people, have talked about flooding the zone and with information, and that's a political theme that we've seen people like Steve Bannon talk about. Not that he's, someone that you should reference in terms of credibility, but it's definitely a strategy. And it's a strategy that's been employed within the UFO topic for a very long time. Whenever there is been rumored to have been a transition with the program, or maybe a tenuous time or era where there was some sort of big change going on geopolitically, all of a sudden you do see a lot of information about UFOs coming out. Now, that's some of that is also going to be tied to the phenomenon, because the phenomenon tends to show up at times of tension and liminality, not just locally and personally within, for individuals, but also for the globe, right? So the 70s was 1973, the year of the humanoids. That was in the middle of really heightened tensions in the Middle East. And now
Yeah.
we're seeing similar tensions today. And so I think that, it's very likely that we are going to see new UFO reports. Most of those are going to be military technologies, and we should expect that they're military technologies. Um, but again, that all goes back to making everything about the UFO, right?
Yeah.
You tend to lose perspective. You forget that it's always been just the residue. It's always been this 2 to 5% of cases, if that, that end up being exotic, and then even maybe a smaller piece that ends up being possibly related to NHI. And so I think that, to be honest with you, over the last few years, I think we've gotten a little sloppy and a little lazy to where
Yeah.
even the the thresholds that we established or that we accepted, it's more likely, from figures like Luis Elizondo about the five observables. We don't even
Hmm.
adhere to that anymore, right?
Yeah.
As if we can't see it, and frankly, the microcosm that I like to go back to is the drones, right? All of the drones, and we're seeing now how important drones are in warfare all over the world, and it's sort of like we've gotten to a spot where anything that's weird must be a UFO. Anything that we can't immediately identify as an aircraft that we see in our daily lives or that we can conceive of, immediately that's non-human intelligence. And so
Yeah.
you've sort of got a situation where you've got I don't know if you've heard of a concept, the God of the gaps, where you sort of have anything that you can't explain with modern science.
Yeah.
People of various faiths will say, well, that's the evidence for God. And not that there's anything necessarily, I'm not making a point about that, but that's sort of that's where we're at, right? We're in
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
UF NHI of the gaps situation, and we are spinning our wheels. We get more bullet points, but there's no broader understanding. And so I think right now, if you were looking for what should I do to get more context, is to go down some other rabbit holes that aren't UFO related, right? Learn about geopolitics, learn about the national security state, read boring things, and don't
Yeah.
worry if it doesn't say UFO. Learn about drones
Hmm.
and entertain that, even if it's only as just a side quest on your main journey. That's still something that's going to give you a much broader understanding of what's unfolding here today. And I think the other side effect is it's going to make you, hopefully, or it ought to make you more open to alternate perspectives and
Yeah.
hearing from skeptics and people you disagree with, because often you're gonna find out that they have expertise in other areas that you don't, or maybe it's just that they're more liable to look at things that you wouldn't even think to look at.
Yeah.
And so I do find, and I hate to grant this, but I do find that at this present moment, a lot of skeptics, there are a lot of skeptical people who are doing better research than other people are.
Yeah.
And that is, it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
But again, it comes back to getting sloppy and it's sort of getting tunnel visioned about um, the case, right? That we're always, every case becomes the hill you have to die on,
Hmm.
right? And so it's almost like seeing, well, if this does not pan out, this one person, this one story, this one bullet point on my big list, if I don't die on this hill, then the whole thing is fractured and busted. And that if you have a broad perspective, like the old timers, the old hats, the guys who've been and the women who've been looking at this for decades and decades, they don't even care about the stuff that's coming
Individual
out.
cases.
No,
Yeah.
they don't, because they've seen it come and go
Well,
and they've hung around with it.
yeah. It's interesting, that I think you're right that we need to re-embrace kind of a critical thinking approach to a lot of this and broaden our perspective. For my mind, I worry that outside political operators may have recognized that there is that willingness to kind of believe in the UFO community and maybe using that to manipulate us in certain political directions. And as we've seen with some of the people who are fighting for UFO disclosure right now on Capitol Hill. A lot of those are real political partisans, and I don't necessarily trust that their motives are pure UFO or transparency related. So I'm always trying to take a step back and say, well, what is the long-term strategy that this might serve if it's not actually UFO related, but it's more like kind of trying to feed the groupthink a little bit and make people maybe a little bit more conspiratorially minded and therefore are more willing to accept other ideas that are outside the mainstream and therefore affect a political, result. So yeah, we need to be on our toes for that reason, and also so that we don't feed into the stereotype of people who are just, willing to believe because we have this set idea of what we're looking at. I mean, if we want to raise this subject up, we have to be as rigorous as any other, sort of vaguely scientific pursuit, or we're just going to be laughed out of the rooms. So I think that that's totally important. Some people have become so sickened with this whole conversation, and I'm thinking of Kelly,
Mhm.
from Cosmosis, that it's almost as if the disclosure conversation is something that they kind of want to get away from because that's not what the real issue is to them. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously you are a scholar of the whole of all of it, the nuts and bolts and the government part and all of that. So, I mean, you must maintain an interest in some of that stuff. How do you balance that with, the feeling at times that maybe we're just being bounced around?
Well, I think that it's sort of interesting in that I don't necessarily see a division
Okay.
between sort of the nuts and bolts aspects and the more personal experience and the absurdity of it all, right? I think that
Yeah.
it really is all one thing. It's all one taste, one uh, phenomenon, and I do think it would be a mistake to stovepipe phenomenology from geopolitics and from policy discussions and from, the even the UFO Twitter battles that occur. And I think really what Kelly, I speak to Kelly a lot.
Sure.
I think really what she's getting at and is not that she's anti-disclosure, she is seeing through some of the alternative aims that certain people affiliated with the disclosure movement are probably looking to affect, and she's not aligned with those.
Yeah.
And I would tend to agree with her on
Sure.
most of those aspects. I personally am of the opinion that it's the intelligence community's job to do one thing, and it's our job as UFO researchers to do another thing. And that's the way the game is played. And that's
Yeah.
the way it's meant to be played. Those are the roles. And I think when we get those roles confused, it leads to some of where we're at today, right? Where we're spinning our wheels because we think you can trust people that historically the UFO community would really not like to trust.
Yeah.
At the same time, I will say that it's not like this is a modern day phenomenon. Anytime a government um, or someone affiliated with the intelligence community, really anyone in a position, a perceived position of authority, says something that we in the UFO community want to hear, we are immediately predisposed to believing them about anything and everything.
Right.
And I think I was discussing this with Jay and Kelly actually not too long ago, and I
Mm.
can't remember which of them said this, but they said, and there's also the added effect that they once they hear something that they want to hear, that person now even gets more authority. They become more
Sure.
important,
Yeah.
and so it becomes this sort of this cyclical effect, and it kind of runs away to where we do kind of alluding back to some of my long-winded comments in response to the first question, where we fight battles over people and
Hmm.
over these individual bullet points and individual cases, forgetting that there's this broader picture out here, and it's all in the name of disclosure. And the bottom line is, when I talk to people, we all have a different notion of what disclosure is and what it constitutes, what an acceptable amount of disclosure is, whether it's realistic to believe that there can be such a thing as disclosure, where it comes from, what it's worth. All of these are open questions. But there's no doubt about it that the disclosure movement, as we see it today, is being manipulated by members of the intelligence community and political figures. It's also almost a certainty that a lot of it is probably um, a result of the however it works with the phenomenon itself, right? I think, we don't want to get away from blaming everything on NHI, but we also don't want to blame everything on the intelligence community either. And so I think that there can be you can find the phenomenon in some of these absurd personality battles, in some of these things that are going on, and so I think it's important to balance both of those things. Um, that being said, if I had my druthers, I would love to focus only on phenomenology.
Yeah.
My reason for focusing on the other things is because you do sort of have to some extent. And Kelly does, by the way. She hasn't
Yeah.
abandoned all hope and um, all involvement in looking at these things. I mean, it's just that that's not her primary focus. And I think that the bottom line is, for better or worse, the government has been incredibly involved from the very beginning of our sort of modern understandings of the phenomenon, and it's going to continue to be probably for the foreseeable future. I don't really see a horizon or an end in sight, and so I think that we do have to be on guard. But I do think that we need to really deeply examine our disposition towards the intelligence community on this topic. I'm not saying that members of the intelligence community are bad people writ large. They are patriots. They are people who care about national security. I would say probably 99.9% of them care about the safety of the American people and your
Mhm.
family and my family and all of these. They care about these things. They don't want a terrorist to blow up your job, right?
Yeah.
They don't want those things to happen, and they work
God bless
hard
them.
to ensure that they don't. Right, and many of them have actually been out in the field and have put their lives at risk. But when it comes to the UFO topic, it would be asinine to take them at their word. And
Yeah.
and so and that's true not just of UFO believers, but also we're seeing today of UFO skeptics as well and cynics. They have the same exact playbook. All of these things that I'm talking about when it comes to the UFO community are just as valid for those who spend their time, I guess, sort of poking the UFO community with a stick.
Yeah. We're sort of in a catch-22 with that intelligence community stuff and with former government folks. It's like experiencers come out and they have a story to tell and it's very important, but they have a hard time convincing a lot of people of their bona fides or credentials because it's just their experience. But when government folks speak and they come from a position so called of like authority from experience within government, we immediately want to invest them with some sort of knowledge that they must have learned from the catacombs of government. So they get a kind of authority, but that involvement with government should also make us skeptical. So it's a kind of we trust them because they were in government and they had knowledge and maybe they had insider access to some of this stuff, but then we should also doubt them because they were in government and
Hmm.
we need to be skeptical of the messages that we're getting because what is the purpose and is it a
Hmm.
manipulation? And when we look at all of the major players and all the major player groups that are involved most publicly in pushing for disclosure, they're all involved in government. They're all involved in
Hmm.
intelligence. Not all of them, but the main leaders often are. I mean, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Carl Nell, McConnell, all these guys are former UF government officials and
Hmm.
oftentimes intelligence people. So, and I mean, people can say, well, some of them are former, but I mean, is that a real thing? I mean, how far away do they ever really get from their former jobs?
Hmm.
And if not their jobs, at least the end goals that a lot of those
Hmm.
institutions may have in terms of this UFO information. So it's so hard to figure out what to trust and what to believe when we're getting all
Hmm.
these conflicting messages from messengers who are at best complicated in terms of
Hmm.
what they're saying. One of the most recent to come out, and I guess we could start with some of the subjects here, was Matthew Brown. He was
Hmm.
on with Corbell and Knapp and had his interviews and has since released a tweet that added some more sort of cryptic information to what he disclosed on the show. First off, let me just get your read of him and what you think of his story, and then we can get into what the tweet was kind of alluding to in some strange way.
Yeah. So I think that personally, I think the story is credible. I think they're very, one of the things that you can say about him is there are very few people, even the skeptics, who tried to necessarily impugn his character or to assert that he was lying about any of this, because he clearly seems to be a very put together person, and that he's telling the truth as he sees it and as he perceives it. And so I don't doubt that he certainly saw what he says he saw. However, I do think it is important to remember that ultimately what we're talking about is that he saw a document or in particular a slideshow on a classified server, um, and that he didn't ultimately know what the context of that document is. That's still, sort of contested. And so, this has been something that's been, of course, seized upon by skeptics, as you would expect. And some of that, to be honest with you, I think could have been, it couldn't have been avoided. They were going to seize on it no matter what. But I
Yeah.
think when it, sometimes the evidence gets sold as one thing when it's not really that thing. So, for instance, the Immaculate Constellation document that's, submitted, to Congress and I give all the credit in the world to Jeremy Corbell, who evidently went out and developed this source and also
Mm-hmm.
helped to get those documents into the hands of Congress. Um, it's one where it looks like is this a government document? Is this government language? And some of it might be, but it's mostly a document that was, typed up by Matthew Brown, and so it does rely on his um, recollection of the things that he's seen. We also
His
need to make
deductions
sure,
too, right? I
right,
mean,
and
like
the deductions
yeah, yeah,
and the framing, and I do think that it's possible. You always have sort of this narrative, and then you have the skeptical counter narrative, and the narrative is that this is a program, and the program exists as it is described, and that's the end of it, right? And then there's the counter narrative of there's this program, and the program is just a fake, right? It's false. It's some kind of a hoax or practical joke. I'm sure we'll get into the Wall Street Journal
yeah.
story in a little bit. But then you have that, and that's on Wikipedia, right? Jason Colavito, a prominent skeptic, or prominent, I say, well-known skeptic, has posted a blog about it. It was just all a mistake. Uh, One of the things I want to say is if Jason Colavito or anybody else was on a classified server and they saw a slideshow like this, I don't know that they could reasonably be expected to immediately wave it off, because anybody who's seeing something in that context is going to naturally say, "What the hell is this? And what's
Yeah,
going on?" And so I
yeah.
think that his natural curiosity makes sense. Um, that being said, I tend to believe the story, and I tend to believe that Immaculate Constellation, even if that is not necessarily the program name, it's more likely to be a nickname, which is a real thing, and often does allude to the program or the project that it is referencing. So, Immaculate Constellation to me seems to be an allusion to something which does exist.
Mm.
Does that thing only pertain to the UFO subject? No, it doesn't, because it's UAP, and UAP can be lots of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that the whole thing is an NHI program. And in fact, as I sort of look at that, this is one of those broader context things that you can sort of pick up on if you
Mhm.
follow other rabbit holes, is
Yeah,
that Immaculate Constellation seems to describe the way that the entire National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and really the intelligence community is set up to function, right? That it doesn't matter what portfolio you hold, whether it's UAP or whether it's a certain kind of aircraft or a certain kind of satellite or a certain kind of drone, or a whole class of something, that if you're a portfolio holder and you know that you need intelligence from a number of assets and intelligence platforms that are all over, that are controlled by different agencies, you've got to figure out a way to coalesce all of that information and get it to the right customers. And that's essentially what Immaculate Constellation describes. It just happens to be about UAP. And in fact, one of the things that I was able to discover in about 2 minutes of Googling was that MCON, which is
yeah.
IMCON, which is just a, a shorthand um, sort of nickname, I guess that you would call it, or a shorthand thing that Jeremy Corbell used to reference the program of one or more times during those interviews, is an actual NGA term, and it's a classification dissemination channel. It's basically a designator, and it's for um, controlled imagery. So sensitive imagery, they would label MCON. Well, of course, UAP tracks and unidentified objects or anything that they don't know what it is of unknown origin is going to be some kind of controlled imagery. And it's probably going to be handled through certain channels and in certain ways and available to only certain people.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that every single track that's controlled imagery is, MCON, but you would expect that UFO, UAP data, all of those tracks and all of those different, all of that intelligence would fall under that umbrella. So again, you have a possible allusion to something which is real and exists. And Jason Colavito can do everything if he wants to go and look up and learn about the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and learn about these different programs and how they're set up, what they're for. Then it's kind of difficult to debunk that the Department of Defense and the NRO and the intelligence community that they sort of use these systems to disseminate classified information. And it's at this point impossible to debunk the fact that they sometimes pick up things that they don't know what they are.
Yeah.
And you have to have a way to deal with that, right? And let's also say this. If you happen to have a track like that during the Schriever War Games, right? What would you do with it? Well, you would, it's the same process. Whether you're in warfare or peacetime or a war game, you need to have some way to track all of this stuff, this information, if it comes in. And maybe Immaculate Constellation is the real name, a fake name. It's just a way to describe what do you do with this information. And so, or to describe the assets and the processes that deal with this. And so, I think, frankly, what's interesting is this is another sort of microcosm where you have a choice with this narrative. You can either accept it and move on, which is what most people in the UFO community, they might do a little bit of digging, but they sort of do a frantic thing for a couple of days and then they move on from it. Or you can do like the debunker thing where you wave it off after a couple of days, you realize, well, that's BS, and then you move on. Or you can just keep on researching it. And what's going to happen is you're going to learn things about the NRO, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the intelligence community writ large. You're going to learn about intelligence collection assets and platforms. You're going to learn about defense modernization initiatives. You're going to learn about a lot of different things. And I think that's the difference between a UFO enthusiast, right, or just an enthusiast about any subject, and a researcher. A researcher digs, an enthusiast gets excited, and I
Yeah.
and you can be excited, an excited researcher, but at the same time, I do think it's worth making. Like if you're just going to take something and you're not going to do any digging or ask any questions, or you're only going to entertain one of these binary possibilities,
Hmm.
you're not going to be a very good researcher and you're not going to contribute very much. You're just going to add more bullet points. You're going to add more water to the flood, and we're going to continue spinning our wheels as we have been.
Yeah, you're just gonna be one more opinion on, Twitter or elsewhere, staking your claim. It's, the thing is about being a researcher also, which I'm not even sure that I qualify necessarily as a pure researcher, but I think that it doesn't matter whether or not what you get to in the end is real or not. The process of researching it and figuring it out has absolute value, and it gives you, critical skills for the next thing that may pop up. And eventually, you get better and better and better, and you get a clearer perspective on all the things that are happening. So you're not necessarily riding on the emotional value of every, it's like, oh, this is it. This is the one, and I'm going to fight and die for it. Or, okay, that's interesting. Let's put that in the puzzle, see how it fits. Does it connect with all the other dots? And if not, well, maybe, you can kind of just leave it there, leave it on the table until you learn otherwise, because you're trying to assemble a bigger picture, and no one piece is any more important in that emerging vision than the one that you're currently working with.
Yeah, you've nailed it there, man. That was exactly. I tell you, I'm going to start just sending you a list of bullet points. Just talk about that because that was perfect. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Yes, you gather all this information that seems useless,
Yeah.
and it may seem boring, but it actually after a while you start finding it pretty interesting, and you when the next one comes. you have a lot more information than most other people who would never bother to look at it because it doesn't say UFO, UAP, technology of unknown origin, whatever the acronym is that we're F searching for. It doesn't say that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really, really important. And I also want to point out that even if you don't consider yourself a researcher, you're gathering information, you're conducting interviews. And again, we need all of those bullet points because
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, often the officials that we might want to talk to won't talk to hardcore researchers. They will not because they
Yeah.
know you're probably going to ask a question that, and you've got the context to do something dangerous with some kind of minor question, even if it sounds innocuous and stupid. And why would anyone ask that?
Yeah.
Um, you could do something very dangerous with that. But at the same time, if they're going to make a lot of mistakes with non-researchers by saying little things because they presume, even though you have a huge amount of context, James, you're very impressive in that way and in many
Thank you.
ways. But
Thank
that
you.
you're going to ask these thoughtful questions, and you get them talking the way I'm talking, and they go, and I listen. And researchers, we live off of that. Even if I can't get the interview with that person, you do. And I think that you don't ask softball questions either. And at the same time, you deliver it in a way that maybe a lot of researchers like myself aren't capable of delivering it. Where we're like, gotcha, like we're
Yeah.
sometimes we're like, or it's not really a gotcha. It's just we want to almost you can get stuck in almost wanting to impress the person that you're talking to by your
Yeah.
deep knowledge and context, and then you don't really get the answers you're looking for.
Yeah.
So you do a great service to the community, and I think that a lot of people are doing the same thing, and it's good. I just think there's so much information coming out. It's hard to even digest all of the information
Yeah.
in a way, and you just it just becomes this. I mean, all of our bookmarks are in shambles, right? It becomes this
Yeah.
never-ending list of things to listen to and read.
Yeah.
And I do think that's intentional, by the way. I do think the intelligence community does that on purpose. It goes back to that flooding the zone concept.
Yeah. Well, that's what's interesting with, again, back to Matthew Brown, that tweet he put out recently, which got a bunch of people kind of scurrying. There was so much in it, and it went in so many different directions from like, I mean, he's talking about, technology and AI, but then also he's alluding to like Enochian ciphers and like angel names from John Dee and just a lot of really weird stuff. Did you get a chance to look at that? And what were your thoughts on it? I mean, just there was a summary someone posted on Twitter on the summary was that Matthew Brown had said that sentient AI existed. It was murdered. The government is using predictive AI. There's a Navy site that's tracking light craft, not necessarily structured UFOs, but actual maybe plasma kinds of
Hmm.
things, which then is interesting because it links back to the Condign report from the UK, which basically
Hmm.
said that there are potentially intelligent plasmas floating around in our atmosphere, which is interesting and I think important. He posts
Hmm.
the Enochian sigil, and that sort of implies divination and magic and tech, and whether or not they're all intertwined. And then that connects back to his last line of the interview, which is God is real. I mean, we're going in
Hmm.
so many different directions here. What is the most valuable thing to come out of him? And is it, again, just put all the pieces on the board and see what we can make fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think I fired off a tweet as well, again after just 5 to 10 minutes of Googling,
Mhm.
just to sort of like put out there what I was able to find. And the first thing he referenced was marsupial
Yeah,
as
program
a project
marsupial.
name.
Yep.
Yeah, and so again, I kind of put out there that I after some searching, I was able to find a few references to this, and it's a mode of it's sort of an engineering concept where you have one robotic system or an autonomous system that is sort of
Ah,
like a mothership for other autonomous systems, which is a concept right now that's very popular, as we can see with all of these drone things that are going on all over the world. I've seen recent
exactly. There were reports of that on the East Coast with the New Jersey stuff, right? I mean, like
that's
the
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there have been stories about China having, coming out about their projects related to sort of motherships releasing lots of drones. It's almost, I mean, we definitely have that, right? Drone swarms. I'm sure that we can release, I know that we can release drones from submarines, from airplanes, I mean, we recently saw Ukraine sort of did a brilliant thing where they were able to get some trucks into Russia and decimated a lot of their strategic
Bomber
bombers.
fleet. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I think it's worth, noting that you could have a craft that is, operating in orbit that releases other smaller craft. I mean, that's the way some of our satellites have worked in the past, where you have micro satellites that were actually released for weather monitoring or other kinds of activities. And so there's the other thing too is with light craft is I think he said unstructured light craft. At the same time, light craft are there is a term as well that is any kind of
Ah.
craft that could be powered by a beam, like a laser beam, and they look almost like a top, like a spinning top. And if it let's just say if you had a mothership with a good power source on it, is it possible that that mothership could, power a light craft with a beam? It's possible. I don't know. And it's also
Yeah.
possible, a lot of people will hear that and will say, oh, so you're just debunking. And it's like, it's not debunking, it's having a wider context about the kinds of
Yeah.
technologies that are out there and being open to the fact that those are there. It's also possible that that's how NHI does some things too. We don't know.
Yeah.
And in fact, Gimbal, right, sort of looks a little bit like a light craft. If you've seen what they look like, maybe you'll be able to pull up a. I'm looking at Wikipedia at one right now, and it's very interesting,
Mhm.
and might certainly explain some UFO cases of our past that maybe did relate to some government tests or projects and things like that.
Yeah.
That being said, um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information that came out, in that tweet. And when I say came out, I think we need to be careful at the same time. Uh,
It
where did
doesn't
that
really
information come
say,
from?
yeah, and what does
Right,
it actually say? I mean, there's a lot of references,
right.
but
There's a lot of references, and we're speculating around those references.
yeah,
And
exactly.
marsupial, even that, like it's. I think it's delivered all in caps. Is he putting out the actual program name on X? I don't think he is. I don't think
No,
he
I don't
would
think
do
he's that
that.
stupid. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
he's very smart, and he
Yeah.
would not do something that could land him in prison. So it may
Hmm.
be possibly it's a nickname. Possibly it's an exercise name, which is are still regulated, but not as regulated as a program name, certainly, and might allude, as we talked to earlier, to the actual subject matter that it relates to. That being said, there's also uh, we don't know where that information is coming from. We it's I think we need to be careful and understand that, and this goes not just for Matthew Brown, it goes for everybody, that there are things that you learn maybe in a briefing, and if it's an official briefing, or maybe if it's in a setting with certain people, it gets more, there's more weight that you can apply to it. Or maybe you do stumble upon some documents, and those things are going to have a little bit more, or a presentation, and maybe sure that has a little bit more value and a little bit more weight behind it. However, once you come out and you identify yourself as somebody who's seen things and worked on things or anything like that, you start to meet other people, and they start to pass along their information, and you get hit by the wave of bullet points. And so it's
Hmm.
hard to tell where the information that you received in your position as a result of your access and things that you were exposed to officially or maybe unofficially or accidentally, and where that begins and ends, and where I get DMs from all of the same people that podcasters and researchers get DMs from, and
Yeah.
maybe they told me a little bit more. And I do also think it's important to know that whether you're a so-called whistleblower, and I'm not saying so-called because to apply to Matthew Brown, I'm just saying writ large,
Yeah.
anybody who comes out with anything these days is automatically,
It's
that's a
automatically
whistleblower.
whistleblower if they served in the
But
military 30 years ago. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
right,
they,
because that's a
yeah.
noun that provides some level of authority, right? And it may be true in some instances. People have blown the whistle. I do think that Matthew Brown, they say, went to Congress and or at least attempted to. I don't, to be honest with you, I don't remember if he actually was able to get in front of somebody. I think he did, but then he didn't get further. And that's where the document kind of came in, trying to fill in the blanks
Yeah.
for investigators who weren't uh, taking the appropriate um, interest in what he had to share. And so, that being said, you have whistleblowers who come out, and immediately you are going to get swarmed by members of the intelligence community. If there is anything in your story that might be beneficial to them because they're true or because they're false, they are going to amplify that. They're going to amplify your belief in those things. This happens to experiencers too, and I think that that's really important. Earlier, we talked about there being this dichotomy between government information where we want to believe government folks, but we don't want to believe experiencers. I see a lot of experiencers getting put on a platform too,
Yeah.
and I think that Chris Bledsoe can be an easy target a lot of times for people to criticize. Um, but imagine that you've had an experience the way he has and his family has, and you've been isolated, and now you have somebody who's coming in and validating everything from the government, right? And they're saying,
Mhm.
you are special. We knew all about this. We've seen all of this before. You're you're this, you're that. This, I can't believe you've been exposed to all of these things. This happened to Stephen Greer. It happens to all of them. It happens to any prominent experiencer is going to have somebody, swooping in. And by prominent, I mean well known. Is going to
Yeah.
come swooping in and is either going to, maybe they're going to threaten them. Maybe they're going to, you're going to have one hand over here threatening, the other one's going to come and be their savior, and then all of a sudden they get all this information, right? All of a
Exactly
sudden
right.
where
Yeah,
does
and that's
why would
and
they
where's
give
the
you the
manipulation? It's like if you
information?
start explaining the things that happened to them, like that can fill in the story of whatever the experiencer experienced, and then they can help propagate whatever narrative
Right.
the yeah.
And I want to say
Ah,
this, I am not in any way invalidating. In fact, I'm
sure.
validating those
Yeah.
experiences are real. I think that those experiences happen. I think what happens again is you get this, where does it begin and end? That happens with
Mhm.
experiencers too, as well as whistleblowers. Where, am I getting information that the lady told you, or am I getting information that somebody else told you about the lady? That's just,
Exactly.
am
Yeah,
I
yeah.
getting information that you learned from that presentation you saw on the classified server, or am I getting information that somebody told you about the presentation on the classified server? Like you know, those are not, and I want to, there's some people who might see this and are going to say that I'm not attacking anybody. Those are
No,
reasonable
yeah.
questions to
And
ask.
those are the complexities that we're constantly dealing with in this subject.
That's the
I
way it
mean,
is. And that's the way
yeah.
that it is for them too. You and I are frankly blessed in that we don't have, I mean, people are going to throw things at us,
Mhm.
but we're not controlling, or we don't have a huge stake in the narrative such that we're going to get that kind of attention to make you think you're the best that there's ever been, and like all of
Yeah.
these things that they will do. You might get a little bit of that, but I mean, we're human beings. Like, people come, and especially if you're in a spot where as a whistleblower you feel like, no, you feel isolated. It's the same thing actually if you want to look at it. I mean, whistleblowers who've been defamed or who have been ignored, who have been threatened, some of them, and faced career repercussions. It's the same thing for a lot of experiencers too. And that
Mhm.
maybe you could even make the argument that they experience the phenomenon at different levels and different layers in different contexts, but that they're both experiencing the repercussions of experiencing the phenomenon. And
Yeah.
then, of course, there are societal repercussions, there are institutional repercussions, and you're isolated and you're looking for somebody to validate your story, and you're going to find somebody in the UFO community to do that.
Yeah.
And it's so I think it's important to know that if you are somebody who maybe does have valuable information, you are more of a threat than somebody who does not. And you are more likely to be manipulated and more likely to get bad information
Yeah.
than somebody who is not. And I will even say, even if you work for the intelligence community actively, um, you know, that does not mean that every bit of information that you get about UFOs, even at a formal briefing, is accurate.
Yeah.
Because the bottom line is, even if you receive a formal briefing, there is information that is clearly connected to your need to know. Otherwise, you wouldn't be getting the briefing. And there is other information that is not. So,
Exactly.
therefore, if somebody has no need to know about alien bodies, then there is no reason why anyone in a formal briefing would tell them about the alien bodies.
So if they
Period.
are, yeah,
If they're learning information about that,
yeah.
they should immediately be skeptical. Maybe
Yeah.
believe the things that this is the reason they're telling me this is because I'm handling this portfolio. Otherwise, I would not be here. They would not be giving me this information. All the rest of the stuff, all
Mm.
of that stuff, you should be incredibly skeptical about it. And I'm giving advice. And I think most members of the intelligence community realize that, but some might not. I mean, if you find yourself in the presence of somebody with a lot of authority, and they're telling you, information, you might be inclined to believe it, even and especially if you've known them for a very long time. And now they're saying, "Hey, I was working on this program, and here's the information." That doesn't mean that all of it is false. They probably have to give some true information, or else the misinformation is not going to be very good. If all of it's BS, it's not a very good campaign.
Right.
And now we're learning. I'm sure you'll want to talk about the Wall Street
Yeah,
Journal
that
thing,
might even
but
be a good pivot to it. I mean, essentially, like it's interesting because we've had these whistleblowers come forward, and some of them I think are like David Grush. I would say is a definite whistleblower. It seems like, as much as I'm able to ascertain. But is it possible that some of that same you know, uh, some of that same issue was at work with him. I mean, where he was given some information and other information on top of it to muddy it up. He says that it's impossible that he would have known about the Wall Street Journal hoax if it was true. And so he says that he doesn't believe it's true. But what are your thoughts on what they reported, and could that explain some of what we're talking about, where there might be true nuggets in the information that's given out, but a lot of it's buried in misinformation, and that misinformation over time is congealed into what we consider the UFO narrative.
yeah, I mean, I do think that investigators, if they are in an investigation, and even if they have the authority to conduct the investigation, they're kind of reliant on the people that they're interviewing to interpret the situation in the same way that they interpret the situation.
Mm.
The investigator may say, "Well, I've got the authority and the need to know." And so I can trust that if you are in a certain situation in a skiff and you understand that there are maybe repercussions of some kind, I don't know if there are or not, I don't know how it works. For telling me a lie, you cannot and will not tell me a lie. But the person sitting on the other side of the table who maybe works on a program that you don't have access to, or they have determined that you don't have a need to know because there's some internal, and that's the way I do know that's how that works. They have an internal an internal policy and an internal decision making about who has a need to know. You don't come
Well,
externally
that's
and say,
convenient.
yeah, it's extremely convenient. And that's
Yeah,
and that comes from the Wilson Davis notes where they're talking about this program, and they are the ones who decide what the policy is for people, and they won't even tell you what the criteria is for inclusion on the bigot list, and because they don't have to.
yeah,
Telling you that gives you a big list of people. Well, if that's the case, then I know that this person, this person, this person, I can go. And if I get this, then I can now know about the program. They don't want to give you a roadmap to get the information that they're actively trying to conceal from you. So
yeah,
I will say this: David Grush is an incredibly talent. I put him honestly at the top of all of them in terms of credibility.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
do think that he did the work, and I'm sure that he knows that he dealt with. I'm not telling him anything that he doesn't know.
Yeah,
Like that he's dealt with hostile witnesses, some of whom have lied to him. I do think and also I think he's been fairly responsible. Where there are certain things that he's alluded to that are a little bit more, out there. That he's
yeah,
said, I would like to know more information about that.
hmm,
And he's not out necessarily saying that all of this is true. I feel like he has parsed out things that he's learned through his investigation, things that he suspects, and things that he maybe doubts. And
right,
so I do think, however, the Wall Street Journal article is I would consider it pretty poorly researched.
okay,
And I'm not a journalist in the sense that I don't work for journalistic organization. I don't work for a news agency or a media outlet. Um, at the same time, I do find that there were a lot of very easily, glaring errors in what we've seen about that story.
Mhm.
And one of them is obviously related to the idea that the nuclear shutdown incidents were all related to these tests. And I think if I remember correctly, this document that they're using to substantiate this claim is a document from, I think, 1978. I could be wrong. Sort of discussing plans for evaluative testing and showing that they had to build a testing facility, and it involved a large crane and an electromagnetic rig with for generating an EMP, with even cables going down in the ground. And of course, yes, if the Soviets in that day could erect a giant rig and attach cables onto the ground at our strategic air command sites, then yeah, we're in a shitload of trouble.
Yeah.
Forgive my French, but I think also so there's that's a little bit ridiculous. It also post dates a lot of
A lot of those events.
a
Yeah.
lot of those events. I mean, there were UAP sightings over strategic sites from the very beginning, like before
Hmm.
1947, and there were those strategic air bases, those northern tier bases, were getting
Los
buzzed in the
Alamos, right? Was
60s.
yeah, and Los Alamos had
Yeah,
reports of things flying over. Whether I
yeah.
mean, yeah,
Even the Malmstrom case, right, with Solace, I think the one that they were sort of attacking specifically, it occurred prior to this testing again, which was evaluative testing, which is not the same as operational testing. There's
yeah.
there's multiple kinds of testing. There's evaluative testing, operational testing. They're not the same thing, and and
And then one follows the other, right?
and
I
one
mean,
follows the other.
operational testing will follow evaluative testing, and so if they're still at
Yes.
that stage, that means they haven't deployed what they're talking about.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, it's
Yeah,
sort of, or rather, when I say evaluative, I really should say developmental testing. It's all evaluative testing, but developmental
yeah.
testing, it goes DT, then OT. And I've even stumbled upon some things where people are talking about you should not combine those things, right? Like sometimes program managers want to combine those things, but it's a stupid thing to do. You're risking money, you're risking materials. And the other thing, too, is the bottom line is, there's a giant rig that you have to erect with like cranes and with things like that. And it's got to be right over the silo. And then you have hovering craft. And you have craft that, yes, we're on the ground, and then they take off and shoot away. So, and I think it's also important to know that there are other prominent people who have said that there were U.S. tests going along with that. Like, for instance, Kit Green has passed along an anecdote that he learned from some guy on a train,
Mhm.
which sounds very suspect. He passed that along to Jacques Vallée that, well, there were basically helicopters, or there was something that they were testing the security of the bases. And that might be true in some instances.
In some cases,
I
yeah,
Right. I don't know how that involves shutting down 10 nuclear warheads.
yeah,
Why they would
simultaneously,
why
yeah,
they would do that. Not to mention, it also happened in the USSR, and in those cases, in at least one of
exactly,
those cases, they turned the nukes on. So
yeah,
I'm not saying. I'll be honest with you. I'm open to the fact to the idea that some of those might be government tests of some kind. I don't know, right? Maybe
hmm,
I mean, the government does a lot of really wacky stuff that's difficult without precedent sometimes. That's very difficult to understand why they would do it. So it's possible. I just think that if that's possible, that article did a really poor job of
hmm,
establishing that case. And again, it goes down, I think it again goes back to the deeper context and understanding that. I think that this person, sort of said, well, this is Sean Kirkpatrick who's telling me this, and he knows because he's an authority figure. So that's all the evidence I need.
yeah,
And now he's giving me this DoD document, which, by the way, I mean, like, do you know that there's a DTIC site? You could search all that information up. Like, this is not like he's passing along these sensitive
state
documents about
secrets, yeah,
secret platforms. This is old information.
yeah,
Now, the notion of a hazing ritual, frankly, I could see it. I don't know if I'd call it hazing, however. I'd call it part of a
Purity,
security
right?
measure
Yeah.
for a
Which was my
pre-existing
initial thought with
program.
one of the reasons why with Matthew Brown I was initially like, I'm not sure, is because what he discovered in the system to me seemed like it might be part of some security thing. Like you throw out there
Mhm.
this really flagrant and exciting information, and then you just watch to see or monitor to see if that information bubbles up, and if you do, someone's
Hmm.
leaked it, and so that
Yep.
was my initial concern, which
Yeah.
sounds a lot like what they're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's a very decent possibility and a good possibility. I have no doubt in my mind at all that the UFO topic has been used to cover up secret programs. Like, I mean, that's something that Annie Jacobson, who's a
Mhm.
very talented writer, and I particularly like her work on I really like her Area 51 book, and I love her book Phenomena, and she's
Yeah.
got a book about Project Paperclips, wonderful. She was told that information too, right? So there's
Mhm.
I don't remember the name of the gentleman, but he said that, oh, all the UFO stuff at Area 51, that was just to cover up our, development of our own discs and things like that. And he passed her some photos, or someone passed her some photos that she has actually posted on Twitter. And I'll be honest with you, like I totally believe that Lockheed has been developing discoid platforms for a long time. I mean,
Yeah.
there have been other indications of that. I'm not somebody who believes that the government, has not made any progress on that. That's just my,
Do
that's my
you
disposition.
Real quick, do you think that's anti-gravity or do you think it's like an Avro car kind of like thing?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I really am not sure, but one of the photos where I was getting to, it got sidetracked, is one of the photos that she has posted is clearly a photo that depicts, and it even says on the slide, it's a skunkwork slide, that is their forms for making perfect curves, and they look like a flying saucer. I'll send that to you, so if you want to put it
Yeah.
up, you can.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
look
Yeah.
just like a flying saucer, but it's what they do is they heat the metal and they bend it around this perfect sort of like disc feature. And I mean, it
Mhm.
looks like a perfect flying saucer. And they bend it around to make these nice perfect curves. And yes, they did develop, we know, some drones that aren't disc, they're not discs, but they are discoid in the sense that they have a perfect curve along the front. And that's
Right.
been declassified at this point. But what my greater point there is that even these authors and researchers and historians who are really, really solid in certain areas can get led astray if they don't have the right context and they don't
Mhm.
have the larger picture. And so it's very easy for a talented journalist who might do really good work in other areas to stumble into UFOs and get their lunch money stolen, right? Because
Yeah.
they do not realize how much insanity comes along with this topic.
Yeah, they think all
Uh,
the normal rules apply, and
right, exactly, exactly. That I can trust my NatSec source, which, by the
yeah,
way, they can never trust their NatSec sources, but
yes,
they do because if they don't and they speak out about it, then they won't
they
have any
don't get
NatSec
access.
sources. And that's,
Exactly.
as a member of the media, you know how that works.
Yeah,
Uh,
2003, the Iraq War, that was all about
mhm.
like trying to preserve people's sources and not asking the hard questions. But Green Street had Tim Phillips on from Arrow. Did you get a
Mhm.
chance to watch that? And what were your thoughts on that?
I've seen clips from it. I haven't gotten
Mhm.
to watch the whole thing. That's actually on my list for today. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is it sounds like Phillips, who has been very antagonistic in
He said that there was some mystery, right? That's what I kind of got
he
out of
said
it.
that there's some mystery. He even talks about the black triangles, which again,
Yeah.
I've seen some people point out that that also is just lends a little bit more credibility to Matthew Brown. Of course, we need to remember that black triangles. I mean, you've got Marler writing a book about those. Like those, that's been around for a long time. A lot of
Mhm.
people will point to secret machines. Marler's book, predates that by a long time. Same thing with. I mean, it's just that's been out there,
Mhm.
and so. I think it's important to realize that yeah, we have Arrow officials. I also think it's interesting that why is Kirkpatrick held up as the always held up as the authority when we do
Yeah.
have Jay Stratton
Yeah.
who headed up their the UAPTF, which is just this in the same lineage. I mean, Lou Elizondo, for all of his positives and negatives, like he had saying the same thing. He was sitting on that program in an authoritative role. And
Mhm.
why are they? Why is David Grush and all of these people like we don't believe them, but as soon as Kirkpatrick says something that we believe, then now he's credible. It's a
Because
double
he's saying
standard.
the credible line, you know?
Right.
Yeah,
It's a double
exactly.
standard, and it's an obvious double
Yeah.
standard. Even I saw that even John Greenwald, who has, found himself, on the opposite end of the spectrum with a lot of these battles over the years with the in the modern UFO community, he has pointed this out, and credit to him. I mean, he does a lot of good work anyway, but
Hmm.
just credit to him for sort of seeing and calling out that um, that double standard that's being applied here.
Yeah. It's and then Barber, of course, also talked about black triangles with
Hmm.
in the jungles of Indonesia, I guess it was.
Hmm.
And he's another person who's come forward. And what I like about their approach, which I think is different than what a lot of these other people are doing, that rather than talking about information, he's brought some of that forward, but he's also saying, just watch me. I'm going to do
Hmm.
something that is going to prove
Hmm.
or not what this is I'm doing. And he's stretching people's, credulity with the psychic, reeling in of UAP. A lot of people have a hard time with that. But if that is true, it fits in with a lot of UFO lore. And he's saying, let's just see what happens. And I like
Certainly
that.
does. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's definitely a positive in his column there. I mean, they are, they come under a lot of criticism, sometimes by me. I throw a little shade there every now and then. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
equal opportunity sometimes, but at the same time, yeah, like they're trying to share some information. They are trying to get some stuff out there. I am a little skeptical. I think evaluative testing is a very real possibility, and I think that they have
Mhm.
maybe also admitted that that could be um, a possibility as
Some of
well.
what
But
they've
they are,
seen.
yeah,
Yeah.
some of what they've seen. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting in that there seems to be some conflicting information because they say that they can reel them in, which I believe is a real phenomenon. Like we've written about
Sure.
that, and
Yeah.
my colleague
CE5.
especially.
People have been doing
Yeah,
that for a long time. Yeah.
it's been there for a long time, even in Brazil, and they were doing that, in the 80s and 90s. At the same time,
Is that the Mission
um,
Rama folks that you're talking about, or?
no, no, actually, the Brazilian military actually
Oh.
commented on one of Valet's trips out there that they were able to do something that they could make orbs appear. Yeah, so that's
Ah,
no
okay.
that's in one of the journals. But
Ah,
yeah, like so it's been known and has been out there, and of course, yes, you referenced Mission Rama and C5. At the same time, if I've also heard that they're only seeing them at certain points of the day, or there's like a certain time of the day that they see them. Well, if you
mhm.
only see them at a certain time of the day, then it doesn't really sound like you're summoning them. It sounds like you know when to show up. And that's, you know what I'm saying? Like that's a very silly thing. Maybe I've misconstrued what they've said, and it's possible. And I also have seen them really heavily relying, kind of actually moving away from the psionic asset explanation and moving more towards this
Uh,
technology.
yeah, dog whistle,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and if you're using a dog whistle and then at a certain time of day and the UAP show up over your site and now there's talk of dues and directed energy weapons or rather of you know uh, you know, basically being jammed and things like that. That sounds to me, as someone who doesn't work in the Department of Defense or intelligence, just as somebody who's been down a lot of rabbit holes, that sounds a lot like there's a possibility of operational testing there
yeah,
going on, and maybe it is that, and maybe it is operational testing, and they're the ones who are conducting the operational testing, or maybe they're the test bed and they don't realize that they're the test bed,
yeah,
and maybe all of what they're saying is legitimate and it's all NHI. I don't know.
yeah.
I suspect it's probably, as with almost all of this, a mixed bag.
A mixture
And
of
and
both. Yeah,
and people will hear us talking about this and they will put me on either the believer side
yeah,
or the skeptic side, is the same way they do with Kelly and Jay and
yeah,
all of our good friends. And
yeah.
the bottom line is we just have more of a stomach for nuance than most people do, right? Most people want to
Exactly.
collapse, and we aren't necessarily we like asking questions, and
Yeah.
and we're curious people. And so and I think the other thing too that I would like to freely admit is that I get a lot of stuff wrong, but I do it quietly. I
Yeah.
don't, all right, because I don't necessarily blast out my immediate opinion on everything. Sometimes I have seasons where I do. I'm not in the spotlight. But for a
Mm,
lot of people who are, content creators and even journalists and things like that in this space, as soon
mhm.
as somebody comes out with a story, they're almost obliged to acknowledge it and to stake a position. Because to not do so is to lose traffic, or it
Yeah.
is to get canceled or whatever it is by people they rely on for clicks and attention. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's this obligation, as I'm sure you know too. You've got to talk about these things.
Yeah.
I don't have to talk about these things. So I
Yeah.
can wait and sit back and either comment or make no comment. And, if I'm wrong, like nobody knows about it because I just haven't made any noise about it. So I can just kind of sit back and as things fall apart or as things come together, I can just observe.
Yeah.
And that's um, I suppose that's the one of the baked in privileges of not being necessarily a regular kind of content creator. That it does afford you some time and some space to just see how things play out.
But also, I have to say that you're never afraid to reverse what you're thinking if you encounter new evidence or new material. It's like you may express an opinion, but you're not proclaiming this is the way it is, and everyone shall bow before this
Yeah.
proclamation. It's
Well,
like
it's because I'm a
you may.
pansy. It's because I'm a pansy. I like people to like me. So I don't like to say things
Yeah,
that people don't like. So I always try and say something that all people either like or hate. And to
yeah,
be honest with you, I'm because I don't have a huge platform, I don't the skeptics pretty much leave me alone. The believers, for the most part, like me, and I would consider myself a believer. I think there's a
yeah,
there to the phenomenon. I don't say that in a disparaging way.
yeah,
Um, I also I've been wrong a lot. And so I,
yeah,
I know what it, and I feel like I respect people much more when they come out and just admit that they're wrong. And they just say, I got that wrong. Guess what? That's UFOs. That's life. It's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. I will be wrong
yeah,
again.
yeah.
And
I
and that's
predict.
just the way of it, right? Like I have a prediction that I will be wrong about UFOs. Welcome to the club of UFOs and just, general reality.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could end up with what we were talking about before we got on the air about Weinstein. We were
Hmm.
talking about the whether or not this is a hazing ritual or a developmental tech or whatever else. He came out with a rather dramatic tweet recently where he was basically saying that he didn't say in the tweet that he didn't think UAPs had anything to do with the NHI or that there were no NHI related UAPs, but he did say that the cover up has to do with technology. And it kind of goes along with what, there's been a lot of reporting and podcasting on this anti-gravity tech and how over the 50s and Townsend Brown had developed, anti-gravity tech, and then it got sort of sublimated into the black world. And maybe a lot of what we're seeing is actually us developing that tech in secret. And there may be a point in the near future where that gets revealed, and there may be energetics that go along with that. But Weinstein is also saying, though, that not only is that the cover up, but there has been manipulation of the physics world where sort of false trails have been laid. And he points to quantum gravity. Now, he has a vested interest in that because he has his own theory
Hmm.
on what's at stake in reality. And I know that a lot of mainstream scientists sort of smirk at Eric
Hmm.
Weinstein's theory, and I don't know enough about any of it to even have an opinion, so I won't even go there. But
Hmm.
what are your thoughts on all of that? I mean, I think no shit, excuse my language, science has been
Hmm.
manipulated by government for state secret reasons.
Hmm.
And if we had anti-gravity and anything that could produce, even high amounts of energy that could potentially be used as bombs or anything else, that would definitely be all, secreted
Hmm.
away. But I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think he's not the only person who's pointed that out. I think that Mark Andreessen also had an interview not too long ago. He's a big tech investor.
Hmm.
What was he? Is he Wolfram Alpha? I think something like that. I'll have to look him up again, but
Yeah.
um, he was discussing sort of math and AI and sort of with somebody at the White House, I believe. and or at least somebody in the executive branch, and they sort of he made the case, well, it's not like you can classify physics or classify math, and the person interrupted him and said, no, we actually can and have classified physics and math. We did it during the Manhattan Project, and we could do it again, basically, if we decide that something is too much of a threat to have out there, we can do whatever we want. And
Mhm.
so, which took him by surprise, and sort of put a different tone or color to their. I think what they were talking about was regulation of AI, and that if you're regulating AI and how these systems are built, you're essentially regulating certain kinds of math, and that it's not possible that they would do that. Um, we see this throughout the kind of the UFO literature, and not just the UFO literature, but also sort of the psychoenergetics literature too. A lot of people point back to Tesla and the
Mhm.
Tesla's field equations, that there was something that was missed and or something that was added that sort of lets you fall into the wrong rabbit hole from which there is no return and from which there is no escape. If you fall into an academic rabbit hole, let's say something like, I really know nothing about physics, so I'm telling on myself here, but I think string theory, I think, has fallen out of vogue with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, if you
Yeah.
spent your entire career on string theory, what do you do? Like, and I think that these entire fields and subfields, you populate these fields, and it's all theoretical. A lot of it is not experimental, or if it can be demonstrated experimentally, it's very expensive, and it happens far and few between.
Mhm.
Um, then you're very invested in your findings. And so you're
Mhm.
not going to be inclined to look outside for other, opportunities. I'm even thinking of a conversation between somebody who was purported to be a member of, the so-called MJ-12, and Henry Azazadel, or Armin Victorian, as he was better known, where the person said, well, when they found these craft, but the physics was far behind where it is today. That it's not something that, and I think the implication there was that it was something that we've left behind, right? Like that we've progressed in our physics. And if anybody wants to look at that, I think it's in I believe it's in one of Grant Cameron's books. I'll have to pull that up. But it the implication is that maybe there's some step that we skipped over. And
Mhm.
so maybe it's not even that there's this separate, stream, or this other, that there's something that we just looped over, and we continued on. But if you go back here, like for instance with Tesla's field equations, if you go back there and you do some work, um, and you find the thing that we skipped over, then it's going to unlock a lot of things for you. But because we've progressed past that point, no one's going to circle back and look at that, right? It's
Yeah.
not a, but at the same time, that might explain why we even need a concept like quantum gravity, which is, as I um, naively presume, it's this idea that's supposed to sort of meld these two disparate physics that we have for, quantum physics, and then at the micro quantum level, and then at the macro level.
It's
Um,
relativity, right? I mean,
right,
yeah.
right, general relativity. And we're trying to glue these things together with this again, and it's almost like the God of the gap situation, that whatever is here, this is the key, when maybe in reality the key is back there somewhere. And it's this, if we would go back and fix that, you wouldn't even need that, right? Like that's
Yeah.
actually this piece. And so I know that's more of a of a question that somebody like a Matt Pines would be able to answer, more versed in physics than I am. But
Yeah.
in terms of the general theme, I'm I think that it's legitimate. I think that he's right. I think and I also believe it's possible that he himself might have gotten caught up in some of that, and you wouldn't know it. It's not like there's, a CIA agent sitting in at every, academic conference or something like that, policing things. But they probably do, passively listen. They probably do look and see if somebody starts looking in one direction or another. I mean, a lot of the projects and the secret projects, Manhattan Project, and all of the projects around the development of radar, Rad Lab, all of that stuff is conducted at universities. And so there are members of, defense intelligence who leave and kind of go back and forth. It's the same thing as in private defense. They kind of go back and forth to academia too. And so there is a vested interest that's just sort of natural that you're going to work on the things the Department of Defense asks you to work on or that they want you to work on because that's where the money
The
is, that's the
money is,
funding.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
the biggest thing is why are the I mean if there's no big massive conspiracy. I think a lot of people will look at this and say, well, that how could they possibly do it? They really don't need to do much of anything. They just offer
yeah.
money for where they want you to look, and they don't offer money on the other end. And if nobody cares about that because it's way back here anyway, and it's all bogus based on something that you heard, um, at the American Psychotronics Association, then why does anyone
Hmm.
care about that, right? Like
Yeah.
you're not going to get your PhD over here. You're
Well,
going
yeah,
to get your PhD over here.
and also there's the whole self-policing thing that happens in science where people will automatically be going, well, that's all pseudoscience anyway, because we're way over here and we've proven that this is the path to go.
Hmm.
So anybody who does that would be an apostate by virtue
Right.
of the culture of science in
Right.
some
And by the
ways, you know?
way, Weinstein is that guy. It
Yeah,
has
I
been
know.
that
Yeah,
guy. And
yeah.
I do think
Totally.
that to his credit, I think he's acknowledged that he has done that. And
Yeah,
that's just, but that's the price of admission, right? Like that's
yeah,
not even I don't think that that's, well, only some people do that. They all do that.
yeah.
And that's part of its peer review, right? That's part of being an
Exactly.
academic.
Conformity,
Um,
I mean,
Right. I mean, and
basically,
we're doing peer review here. We're talking about things that have come out and research that's come out, and it's just normal. There is, we're always going to look for some kind of a social structure, and we're going to, in order for that structure to exist and to continue, it has to have insiders and outsiders, and we're going to try and figure out where those lines are
yeah,
and determine the shape of that. So,
yeah. I said that would be the last question, but actually, it reminds me with Matthew Brown's tweet and with other discussions, the AI situation, both here and internationally, and there was the talk in the tweet that Sam Altman had apparently there may have been some sentient AI that was developed, and he may have killed it, and Elon Musk may have viewed that as some kind of a betrayal. But that also ties into something else Matthew Brown has claimed that there's some kind of an AI program that is at work within
hmm
the government that they use for the UAP issue.
hmm
And it also kind of relates to Matthew Brown's tweet because someone made the point when he posted it that it's almost like this new game that's being played where people are posting heavily coded things that can really only be readily dismantled through the use of a chatbot because some of the
mm
references are so coded, and that's almost it's kind of like limiting the spread of information and creating this secret cabal of people who are using AI. But what are your thoughts on all of that? I mean, if we have a sentient AI,
Yeah. Can you still hear me? My audio kind of.
yeah, mine cut out for a second, but it's back on.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I will say that number one, on that last claim, I don't think that you necessarily need an AI to decode all of those things. I mean, like I said, I did about 2 minutes of Googling. I didn't use any AI, and I was
yeah,
able to fire off something that was not 100% accurate. It was just like, hey, here's all these connections I found. Maybe right, maybe something there, may not.
yeah,
And there were some things that I was quite, on. That being said, maybe none of it. The other people have had their interpretations. Maybe those are not correct either. I don't think he's come out and, given a checkbox on the things that are right and the things that are wrong. So all of it is still in the realm of speculation. So I do think that we are getting to a spot where there is a bit of an over-reliance on AI, is specifically when it comes to research in the UFO community. And, we need to really take a step back and look at that. I use AI on a daily basis for my job. In fact, one of the things that I do is create sort of custom AI solutions and workflows for people at my job. And that's one of the things that I do. So I work with
mhm,
ChatGPT a lot and Claude and other models like that and work building agents and all of these sorts of things.
mhm,
I'm by no means a machine learning expert or anything like that. That's just I'm an early adopter.
yeah,
Um, that being said, I know that if you provide any sort of a leaning any sort of a predisposition, any sort of a hint of a possible explanation for something, and you ask AI about it, it is going to almost certainly, if it can, it's going to answer in the affirmative because it's always going to skew its information towards engagement with the user. Whatever keeps the user
Ah,
talking is going to be where it's going to try and skew if it doesn't know. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of the questions that we're asking about UFOs require a huge amount of context. And AI inherently has a context window. And it's not going to go to, even if you do like the deep research stuff, it's going to go to easily accessible sources. It's not going to go and find documents that don't have necessarily, that don't have um, the character recognition OCR on it. It's not going to go and it doesn't have all the books that are on your shelf if they're not uploaded somewhere with OCR that you haven't given it access to. All of those sorts of things. And I have a couple of very niche things that I know the answer to that I think very, very, very few people would know about. Okay. And that
Hmm.
they're not like big mysteries that everybody's asking about. They're just like very, very narrow things. And
Yeah,
I will ask it about that almost as a benchmark to see how close does it get. And sometimes
yeah,
it gets somewhat close, but it does not, it never gets there.
yeah.
It always kinds of, I've seen AI make up
That's
URLs.
what I was going to ask. Well, also, does it ever just make up stuff to get to a conclusion that it thinks will please you?
Yes, I mean, AI will also make up fake citations. It will make up references to papers that don't exist and never existed by authors about subjects which those authors are subject matter experts in, but maybe they haven't actually read, done that with paper. It does that too, and so I think that it's a people pleaser. And the reason it's a people pleaser is because it's largely trained on human data, and we are people pleasers. And
Yeah,
so a lot of the inherent flaws in the information we find online and the human biases are only amplified through AI. And so, its flaws are typically our flaws. And there are things that you can do to fine tune. Generally right now, even though we have sort of these big general large language models, it still seems like if you want to decode the human genome with AI, you want to use something that's specifically trained on the kind of information that does that. And I know that there are people who are applying AI to UFO data sets. That's something that Jacques Vallée has always been, really involved in trying to realize that in his work. So I think that there is some value to that. As far as we talked about this earlier when you use AI, a lot of times, sometimes it can let you fall down a rabbit hole. Sometimes it prevents you from falling down a rabbit hole because rather than doing the sloppy work of sort of Googling and clicking on links yourself and finding this other aggregate information that might actually help you gain a broader understanding of the big picture, you get this dart, right? You're getting a bullseye, and often it's a bullseye that you were looking for. It's an answer to a binary question,
mhm,
and you are now not really predisposed to looking at other things that maybe it didn't provide you with that information.
yeah,
Um, and so I am a little bit concerned when I do see people sort of handing over the work of research writ large to AI and just sort of posting it, just posting the conversation. I use AI sometimes for research. Usually it's about stuff that I have a large amount of context for. And it's either I'm getting information, but I'm looking at it through my own context
yeah.
window, if you
So you
will.
can judge it. Yeah,
And
yeah,
right, and so it's not something and I do find that it is also a really great learning opportunity. But with UFOs, it's really difficult because just the sources are all contested. It is going to use, even though it is a people pleaser, unless you explicitly tell it, it's always going to be a little bit skeptical in what it tells you. It relies a lot on Wikipedia. Be honest with you, I rely a lot on Wikipedia. It's wonderful. Hopefully, people are using paid models that actually link to their sources and clicking on those sources to make sure that they're accurate.
yeah,
Moving on to the question about a sentient AI, I think that number one, I think that that is, um, we're always going to get into sort of like the Turing test uh, question and what your
Mhm.
threshold for sentience is. But the
Yeah,
bottom line is that we have AI models now that are good enough that they can, take the work of from some people away, and that's already happening. And
yeah,
so I don't know if it's real cognition, fake cognition. It doesn't really matter.
yeah.
If it can fake doing your work, then close enough, to replace you, then that's really I'm more worried about that than some sort of cosmic level super intelligence because that has real world relevance
Real
to
world. Yeah,
everybody and you and me and the economy. That being said, again, often it sort of ends up becoming this AI slop, and it tends towards the center, towards something that's easily digestible. There are patterns you can bake those out of them if you want. People point to like the M dash thing. I use M dashes all the time because I'm an undisciplined writer who likes long run who likes run on sentences. Excuse
yeah.
me. Um, do I think that they murdered a sentient AI? I guess it depends on what, do we consider that murder? I mean, every time I
Right. I mean,
close out an instance, am I murdering a sentient AI? I don't
yeah,
know. I do think that we, over the next 5 to 10 years, the field of AI ethics is a good one. And I think it's going to be a burgeoning, it's already exploding and it's going to be a big need because I think we will find that, that there is some level of sentience that maybe we're not comfortable with, or whatever we call it, whether it's artificial intelligence or just intelligence. I don't know.
right.
As far as the NRO piece, yes, like there's that program that's called Sentient that was released. There were some documents that were found by some people. I actually first learned about it on a YouTube video that someone made about Carl Nell because Carl Nell was actually involved with that program in a big way. And it's an interesting feature. Again, I also think that it's just baked into the way that the NGA works and how it was set up to work. It's
Yeah.
just they're relying more on automation than they did before, where you have all of this information coming in. It's you're automating, you're processing it, you're figuring out, you're excising information, and then it's being disseminated to the appropriate channels. AI makes all of that easier. It should be noted that the NSA and Army is in the Army, especially with like Cyber Command, um, is has been working on intelligent machines and working on machine learning for a very long time. And the chances that they have, um, large language models that are much more advanced than what we have is, to me, it's undoubtable, right? It's undoubted.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I don't think that we'd be seeing a chat GPT if there were not already these systems that were in-house, that were very sophisticated, that were pulling in all of these sources of intelligence
Hmm.
and sort of these systems of systems, if you will, um, and and doing this work, right? And a lot of that comes due to intelligence shortfalls like 9/11,
Hmm.
and the Gulf War. There were some intelligence shortfalls there as well, and so yeah. Now, one thing I will say is even here, our research can get a little bit sloppy if we don't understand the larger context. Um, I do not think that sentient is an exclusively UAP project. It's not. It's just the way. It's just the system that is used for every portfolio, right? And
Yeah.
I also am not sure that that's the current system anymore. I mean, if we're seeing documents declassified from 2019 about that, and I've seen
We're
references that
probably
are even
so further
older.
along. Yeah, yeah.
I've seen other references and other documents to it that are even older than that when it was still being developed. Um, those those are right, like the chances that we're still relying on that. People will point to Palantir and something called BlackRock. That's just it's just one piece of a larger system, and I think that it's an opportunity, and I hope that people will really start to pay attention and take that opportunity to learn about the the entire intelligence community and how it works. And I think that's going to make us resistant to bogus information when it comes out, and it's going to give us that context that where when these leaks about these things like sentient, like Immaculate Constellation comes out, that we can really knock it out of the park.
Yeah. And anything else that happens in terms of technology and politics and,
That's right.
espionage and intelligence, all of that stuff requires a good critical, um, you know, thinking, and hopefully this will help us be equipped in that regard. Thank you, Daniel. That was a fantastic conversation, man. I
Thanks so
appreciate you.
much. Yeah, you too.